Welcome to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. My name is Landon Blake. I am your podcast host. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the podcast. If you're curious and you'd like to learn more, we have a special page for the podcast up at www.landonblake.com. Make sure you check that out. We've got our show notes there. You can also download the podcast in your favorite audio format. You should also be able to find the podcast on Spotify and on YouTube. So we've got the podcast episodes in both of those places. So if you use one of those apps or services, you can subscribe to the podcast there. Full disclaimer, I record most of these episodes at my home in Stockton, California. I am married to a crazy Mexican woman, and I have 2 dogs, so you may hear her or the dogs during the podcast episode. I just want to warn you ahead of time. I love all 3 of them, but they are noisy. So if you would like to sponsor a private recording studio for the podcast, make sure you reach out to me and let me know that. Otherwise, you may have some background noise. So with that disclaimer out of the way, we're going to jump right into today's episode. The title of episode 13 is Why Won't the Boss Teach Their Senior Party Chief CAD? So I just want to say right here at the top that I am not picking on field surveyors or party chiefs in this episode. I want to talk about a real life problem. It's a sad something that happens it's sad when it happens, and part of the reason why I'm recording the episode is so that I can try and educate people in the land surveying profession so it doesn't happen. That's part of the reason. The other reason why I'm doing this is I think it teaches us some valuable lessons about business and about life. So I'm not trying to pick on anybody. This is it's a very real problem that affects families and surveyors, and so that's why we're talking about it. So just an overview. I'm going to tell you a story, something that happens to me 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year, at least a couple times a year. So I'll tell you the story, talk about the problem that the story illuminates. Then we can talk a little bit about why does this problem happen over and over again? Why do I get 2 or 3 of these calls a year, the same type of call? So how does it happen? We'll talk about why does it happen, and then finally we'll talk about how do we fix it. Yeah, how do we fix this problem that we have in the surveying profession? And so there's a couple things we're not going to talk about today. So I'm not going to teach you how to do CAD in this episode. So if you're a party chief listening, this is not the right place for that. There's some of that kind of content on YouTube, but you're not going to learn anything about CAD in this episode. And I'm not going to teach business owners how to set up training programs. I think that'd be an excellent episode. It's a lot harder than it sounds to set up an effective training program, but we're not talking about that either. So what we are going to talk about is this situation that comes up where you've got a senior party chief that wants to come into the office and learn to do some mapping work, some CAD work or mapping work, and the boss doesn't want to support that transition. So we're going to talk about why that happens. So I'm going to tell you about a story. We're gonna call this field surveyor, this party chief, we're going to call him Dave. And that's not a real name. It's just the name I'm using. So this is a phone call I've had several times in my career. Like I said, just a couple times a year usually. So I get a call from Dave, or a guy like Dave, and I've never met Dave usually. So Dave is a stranger. He doesn't know me. We haven't met in person. Dave is usually an experienced party chief, so he has 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years as a field surveyor. Dave is usually a man over the age of 55. They're almost always men, and they're when I get these phone calls, they're almost always in their 50s or even in their 60s. And Dave, when he calls me, he's struggling financially. for could be a number of different reasons, but usually it's one of two reasons. So Dave is struggling financially because he's disabled, so he's got severe back pain, or he's got a bad knee or a bad hip or bad shoulder, or he's just physically exhausted, or he's been injured, or it's been snowing for 6 months where he works, and so he's been out of work for weeks or months just because of the weather. And because of one of those things, or more than one, both, maybe there's some other reasons, Dave is he's struggling. He's struggling to put food on the table and pay his bills. And Dave, by the time Dave calls me, he's usually very upset, and he's maybe even desperate, and he's angry that his boss won't bring him into the office and teach him how to do CAD so that he can stay busy and pay his bills. Now, how do I end up with these phone calls? Usually, Dave, or a guy like Dave, finds some of the videos I have on YouTube about CAD or GIS, and they call me for help. So that's normally how I get the phone call. And I mentioned sometimes I talk to, it might just be one guy a year, or it could be two guys a year, or it could be 4 or 5 guys a year, depending on the year. So before we talk about the problem that Dave illuminates, just for if you're listening and you're not, you don't have a lot of experience in the surveying profession, let me just explain what a party chief is real quick. So a party chief, that's the name that surveyors give to the senior person that executes field surveys. We call those people a party chief. And so they're usually a senior level person in charge in the field. So if you're coming from the trades, building trades, you could think of them as like a journeyman. And typically, they're not always, but they are typically paired up with an apprentice, which we call a rodman, or sometimes they're called a chainman or an instrument person. So the party chief is usually the senior person on a 2-person crew. Sometimes they work by themselves on what we call 1-person crew. Okay, and so what's CAD? If you don't know, CAD stands for computer-aided drafting, and it's the software that we use to put together most of our mapping deliverables. Now, a modern survey shop uses other office software, so you might be using a GIS program like QGIS or ArcGIS. You might be using graphic design software like Inkscape or Adobe Illustrator, but typically most of our mapping work's being done in CAD. Okay, so what's the problem here? What's the problem that Dave has, and that Dave's boss has, and that our profession of surveying has? What's the problem presented by this phone call that I get a couple times a year? Well, in order to answer that, I need to be clear about the ask that Dave is making. So let's think about this now. Dave, the senior party chief, he's in a position where, for whatever reason, he can't work in the field like he could before. And so what is he asking his employer? He's asking, so this is a highly paid field surveyor, he is asking to be trained at the company's expense to do entry-level CAD work. Okay, so not pointing fingers or saying that's right or wrong. I just want to be clear here at the ask. So most of the time when I get these calls, these are not guys that are willing to, go back to school on their own dime or invest a bunch of their own time into learning how to be valuable in the office. Most of the time, they're asking the boss to do this. Now, I just want to think about this from the party chief's perspective for a minute, from the field surveyor's perspective, because I understand why they might ask that and expect that the boss would play along. Okay, so here's what might be going through the party chief's brain when he makes this ask. So he might be thinking, I've got decades of experience as a surveyor. That should be worth something. I've been a good employee, showed up every day, didn't get drunk, wasn't, stoned out of my brain. I didn't steal or cheat. He or she, this could be a she. I've never had this conversation with a lady party chief, but it could be a she. I just want to make that clear. It's usually I'm having this conversation with a man, though. So he could say in his mind, I work in the cold, I work in the heat, I work in the wind, I work in the rain, I work in the mud. I work in the thorn bushes, the poison oak. I work in the urban slums. I'm outside all the time in all these different kinds of unpleasant conditions. And so he's thinking in his mind, the boss should do this for me. I've been a good worker. I've been surveying for 20 years. I work outside in all these horrible conditions. Now, all that may be true. And often is. The party chief has decades of experience. They've been a good employee. They work outside in all kinds of harsh conditions. So all that may be true. And I want to make it clear for the record here. Field surveying is tougher than CAD work. Period. Full stop. It's like there's no debate. And I tell my office people that. I tell my CAD techs, hey, field work is way more difficult than being in an office doing CAD work with air conditioning and a high-speed internet connection and a fully stocked snack bar and a bathroom right around the corner when you need it. That's why at my shop we pay field surveyors a little more, because we recognize that work is more difficult for the equal skill level, essentially. So I'm not saying that office work is harder than field work or that it should pay more, because I don't think either of those things is true. Okay, so if the field surveyor is correct about all those things, decades of experience, been a good employee, worked outside in all kinds of harsh conditions, what is the core problem here? Why won't the boss play ball? Why won't the boss train the party chief to do CAD work or mapping work? What is the actual problem here? And the problem is the math doesn't work. That's the problem. So if you're the boss, if we look at this from the boss's perspective, the math just doesn't work. The party chief makes way too much money to be an entry-level CAD tech. Most of the skills they have as field surveyors don't transfer to the office. I'm not saying none of the skills do. Party chiefs may know something about coordinate geometry and how to read a set of plans and know about some different survey methods. I'm not saying none of those skills transfer, but a lot of the skills don't transfer. If you've been a party chief for 20 years, you're not going to come in and draft like you've been doing it for 20 years, almost always. So the math doesn't work. The skills don't transfer. A lot of times these party chiefs are too old to make a large training investment in. Now, look, I know that's a politically incorrect statement, and I know that it may even be in some places it may even be illegal to do that. But look, just because it's illegal doesn't mean companies don't do it. And I'm just trying to be honest and tell you the truth. If you got a party chief that's 60 and he's got 2 years left till he retires, or even 5 years, the boss is going to think about why would I spend 2 years training this guy to be a mediocre CAD tech when he's going to retire, right? So the boss doesn't have an opportunity to recoup that investment. And I think sometimes because people are so afraid of being politically correct, I think sometimes people are afraid of being politically incorrect, and so they don't have realistic conversations about, when an employee as an employee you can get to a point where you're too old to justify a large training investment. And I know people don't like to hear that, and people are afraid to say it, but whether they'll admit it to you or not, your company and your boss, if you're my age or older, your boss might be one of the things that they're thinking about. And so that certainly applies to a lot of these older party chiefs. If you're a party chief in your late 50s or your early 60s, your boss is going to be doing the math in their head. All right, if I train this person to do CAD, how long will it take them to get competent, and how many years am I going to have after they're competent to recoup that training investment? Okay, so I'm going to tell you something else about most party chiefs. Now, I'm not saying this is all party chiefs. There are exceptions to what I'm about to tell you, but in my experience, most party chiefs at most companies lack good computer skills. They do not work well in groups or teams. They don't know how to dress professionally, and they don't know how to act professionally, and they hate being in an office. So think about that from your boss's perspective. You make too much money, your skills don't transfer, you're too old for a large training investment, and then you're going to be a horrible teammate, right? You don't like other people, you like working by yourself, you don't want to put on a pair of slacks or a button-up shirt. You hate being inside. You're gonna say crude and inappropriate things to the office admin. Like, yeah. So a lot of times when the boss is looking at this situation, he's saying, "Hey, this isn't sustainable in the long term, right? You're not worth the investment." And that's just, now look, there's some tough medicine there in that last couple of minutes. But I don't want to lie to the experienced field surveyors that might be listening to this episode. Like, that's the truth. So you got to take a hard look at yourself in the mirror, right? And ask yourself some questions based on what I just told you, right? Do I have good computer skills? Do I work well in small teams? Do I know how to dress professionally? Do I know how to act professionally? Can I handle being inside a building for a few days, a few days in a row? Do I know, what constitutes appropriate behavior with, young women in an office environment? Because a lot of times the answers to those questions are not good answers. Okay, so how does this problem happen? I talked about why it happens. How does it happen? Like, what? Why do I get these calls, on a regular basis? Okay, so I'm gonna tell you why this happens. And again, I'm not trying to point the finger here or place blame. Now you're gonna see, I'm gonna go down a list. I'm gonna give you 4 reasons why this happens, and the boss is in here, so the boss is partly responsible. So here's the first reason this happens: the boss doesn't cross-train field surveyors early enough in their careers when the math still works. Now, when I say the boss, I'm talking about the companies that employ field surveyors. We don't cross-train early enough, and I'm trying to change that in my company, but it's hard to do. And certainly the union, if you're in California and you know about our surveyor unions, they make that almost impossible. So that might be a conversation for another episode. But so we don't start early enough cross-training our field surveyors. And by the time we get around to it, the math doesn't work. It's too late. The party chief doesn't make any investment in their own office skills. So, they work in the field and they go home and they crack a cold beer and they put their feet up on the couch. Yeah, that's pretty typical. The party chief doesn't work to improve their what I call soft skills. So I talked about some of that. How do you treat young women in an office environment? How do you dress professionally? How do you get along with others on a small team? And they don't work on their professionalism. They don't have their LSIT. They don't have their CST. They haven't participated in a professional association or made an effort to build a professional network. They don't do any of that. And then finally, the last thing is the party chief doesn't stay healthy and physically fit. Now, this isn't a fitness podcast, but I can't tell you how important it is. If you're a field surveyor, you need to take good care of yourself and you need to stay physically fit, because if you don't, you're going to shorten your shelf life. And whether, sometimes as men, we don't like to admit this, but we have a shelf life, especially when it comes to doing physical work outside, and a lot of field work is physical. One of the reasons it's hard to find good field surveyors, and again, deserves its own episode, is you have to be intelligent, adaptable, and physically fit, and sometimes it's hard to find that combination. So, being physically strong and tough is part of being a good field surveyor. And if you're smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day and drinking 5 Diet Cokes and eating 3 bags of fiery hot Cheetos, and that's it. Like, that's your daily routine, and you're not exercising unless you're on the job, you're going to shorten your shelf life. So, you got to invest in your physical fitness and your health just like you do in your office skills. And a lot of party chiefs don't do that. When I meet the typical party chief who's in his late 50s, early 60s, that guy has high blood pressure, high cholesterol, a huge beer gut, and he hasn't seen the inside of a gym or an exercise machine, in since he was in college. Now, one person that sets a really good example of not being that person is my business partner, Brian. He is in his late 50s. I don't think he minds me telling you that. and he is probably the most physically fit person I know. And I tell you what, the guy outperforms 25-year-olds in the field. Like he's a beast. And he's inspired me to get into shape. In the last couple of years, I've lost about 50 pounds, and I'm way more fit. So it's all of that, right? That's how this problem happens. We as managers don't cross train our field surveyors early enough in their careers. The party chiefs don't train themselves. They don't work to be professional, and they don't stay healthy and physically fit. Okay, so why do people let this happen? Why do party chiefs let it happen? Why do bosses let it happen to their party chiefs? Because I want to be clear, and I'll talk about this at the end too. Nobody wins in this situation. The field surveyor doesn't win. The boss doesn't win. The profession doesn't win. We all lose when this happens. So why? Why do people... This is such a horrible situation that repeats itself over and over again. Why? Why does it happen? So I'm going to give you 4 reasons why it happens. One is people get comfortable. That's a really bad idea in our economy, right? Like we compete in a global labor market now, and there are hungry people all over the world that want to come and eat you for breakfast. So you can't get comfortable. That's one of the things, my biggest problems with the surveyor unions in California is how they let field surveyors get way too comfortable. I worked at a couple different union firms when drone technology was kind of making its entrance into our profession. And I tried all kinds of different incentives, financial and otherwise, to get my union party chiefs to get their Part 107, FAA Part 107 certification so they could fly drones commercial. I could not get them to do it. I never did get one union party chief to make that effort. And they didn't need to, because they were already making $70 an hour, right, without a license or an LSAT, and they didn't see a need. So people get comfortable, and that's a really dangerous thing to do in our modern economy. The second reason this happens, I think, is because people play the short game instead of the long game. So, if you're a party chief, you're making great money a lot of times. The work's hard, the days are long, but you're making great money. A lot of those guys, they're making that money and they're spending it, and they're not thinking about the future. If they're playing the short game, they're living a good life, a comfortable life, and they're not thinking about the long game. And they're not thinking about what's going to happen when they hurt their shoulder, or they need to replace a knee, or they've got severe back pain. They're just not thinking about that. The third reason this happens is bosses don't talk with their team members about the future. A lot of companies, they'll work you as a party chief as long as you can physically do the work, and when they can't, they're going to throw you away. And that's just how a lot of companies in our profession do business. It's not right. I don't like it, but it's a reality. And so, bosses aren't talking with their team members about, hey, here's what you need to do to be ready for the future. I don't want you to misunderstand me. I'm not saying the bosses have some obligation to run a party chief welfare program. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, you don't wait until your party chief needs a knee replacement to have a conversation with him about what he's going to do when he can't physically do field work anymore. And that's tied into the fourth reason this happens, and that's just businesses do a horrible job of career planning and professional development. They just do. They don't talk about it. They don't do career planning with their team members. They don't help them develop professionally. Now, there are exceptions to that. I'm sure there are a handful of companies in the surveying profession that do an excellent job of this, but most companies don't. We're trying to do that here at RH, my partners and I. It's really hard. We got a lot of room to improve, but at least we acknowledge that it's something we need to work on, and we're making an effort. A lot of companies don't do that. And I was kind of laughing about that the other day. A company I worked for previously, once a year, my boss would come and ask me what 2 or 3 of my professional goals were for the next year. I'd write those down on a piece of paper and give it to him, and then he'd put it in a drawer, and we wouldn't even think about it again until a year later when he asked me the question again. I don't even remember if he kept the piece of paper. That is not... you're paying lip service to professional development, right? If you do that, that's not real professional development. Okay, so to be crystal clear here, I want to make this crystal clear. There's blame on both sides here. So the boss is to blame and the party chief is to blame, right? If you're really going to fix this problem, both sides have to be involved in an effective solution. So, if you're a boss, you can't just blame your old crusty party chief. And if you're an old crusty party chief, you can't just blame your boss. There's responsibility here on both sides. And I think acknowledging that is the first step to getting the problem fixed. So how do we fix it? Can you fix it? Yeah, I think you can. I think you can fix this problem. I think as a profession we can fix it. So how do you fix it? I'm going to give you 4 things you do to fix this. Number 1, cross-train your field surveyors early. How early is early? I mean, early as soon as they start early. So we let all the field surveyors we hire here know they are absolutely going to be cross-trained in the office. They have to learn how to run CAD, basic CAD drafting, and they have to learn how to run Trimble Business Center because we're a Trimble shop. That's it, period. There's no exceptions to that rule. And I've hired a couple guys that are like, I want to work outside. I don't like the computer. I don't want to be an office person. I want to be, and they say, I don't want to be an office person. I want to be a field surveyor. And I tell them, I don't care. I don't care what you want. You're going to learn anyways. You're going to learn in the office. And they cry and they whine and they stomp their feet and they kick. And I tell them, I don't care. And when it's raining, I make them come in and learn how to do CAD. And I make them learn how to process data in Trimble Business Center. Why? Why do I do that? Because it's for their own stinking good. And I know that. That guy gets in a car accident and is in a wheelchair. He is going to be thanking you as the boss if you make him cross-train, even if he doesn't. It's like, even if he doesn't want to. It's like making your kids eat their stinking vegetables. Like what 5-year-old wants to eat vegetables? Now there might be a rare 5-year-old that enjoys broccoli and green beans, but most kids don't, and you make them eat it anyways because it's for their own good, right? So that's part of it. Cross-train early. We start the first week, and all of our field surveyors have to work in the office on a regular basis. Period. Talk to your people about the future. This is I haven't worked with that many young female field surveyors. We have one lady party chief here. She does an excellent job. She does a great job. So I just don't have as much experience with female party chiefs. But I will tell you, young men think they are going to be invincible forever. They either think that or they just don't think beyond, the next hour. A lot of times it's just something testosterone does to the brain. And so one of the things you have to do if you're going to be a good boss is you got to help these young men that are learning to be field surveyors. You got to help them think about their future and what could happen when they get a little bit older and they aren't able to do what they could do before physically, or you need to help them think about what might happen if there was some kind of accident or an injury or a disease. And, they're not going to want to talk about it, and they're not going to take you seriously. So you got to talk to them about it over and over and over again until they listen. And I think that's part of being a good boss, If you're going to have young men surveying for you, you got to make them think about the future. I had a young field surveyor we hired, and he didn't want to take health insurance, and he wasn't covered anywhere else. And I told him, you're taking health insurance. I was like, I'm not going to give you an option. If you don't have it, if you're not covered through another vehicle, another venue, then you're going to take it here. And he didn't want to do that because it costs money, but we didn't give him a choice, and he took it. And you know what? 2 weeks later, he had a concussion and was in the hospital for 2 days in the ER. And I told him, I said, if you didn't have health insurance, this would have been a $60,000 hospital bill. I said, that's why we made you take it. So that's just how young men are. Most of our field surveyors are young men. Now, I hope that changes, and maybe it's starting to change a little bit, but, in my experience, young women seem to be a little more willing to think about the future. So it doesn't matter. Young men or young women, you got to talk to them about it. Talk to them about the future, what the future holds. Work with them to have a plan, They don't have to do this all at once. Say, all right, over in the next 3 years, let's talk about what you should know how to do in an office environment, and come up with a plan in writing. And check those boxes off, and work with them. Give them some time while you can afford to, while their wage is low enough. Give them some time to train in the office. It's going to make them better field surveyors, right? And you're preparing them for a lifelong career too. So have a plan. And then the last thing, and this is for the boss, right? This number 4 is for the boss. Set the example. How do you do that? How do you set an example for your field surveyors? Be a lifelong learner. I am a lifelong learner. My friends and my business partners and my family, sometimes they give me a hard time because I got hundreds of books, and I'm always learning something new or trying something new, and I got piles of newspapers and magazine articles that I save, and I'm a little cluttered. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I'm working on it. I'm trying to reduce clutter, but part of the reason I'm cluttered is because I love learning and trying different things. So I'm a lifelong learner. Set an example for your people. Don't be comfortable. Be learning new stuff all the time. And the other thing you can do as a boss is, take care of your body. And I know that's hard. And like I said, this isn't a fitness podcast, but that's something I'm doing a better job of now, and I want to continue to do. I take good care of my health and try and be physically fit. So take care of your body. Don't be the kind of boss that's sitting at a desk for 12 hours a day, eating fast food for lunch, and is 80 pounds overweight, because you're not setting a good example for your field surveyors about how to take care of their health. So make an effort to do that. I was, I can't remember what happened. I had a sore throat. This is about 4 or 5 months ago. I had a sore throat, and I didn't want to go to the doctor, right? It's a silly thing, but I didn't want to go. And my business partner came to me and he said, hey, you just sent so-and-so home. So-and-so had a sore throat a couple days, and you sent them to the doctor, and they had strep throat, and then you sent them home, and you told them, stay at home, we'll pay you till you feel better. And he said, that employee didn't want to go to the doctor. They didn't want to miss work, and you made them because you told them they needed to take good care of their health. He says, now you're being a hypocrite. And that's one thing my partners are really good at, is calling me out when I'm being hypocritical. And I looked at my partner. I think it was my partner, Brian. I can't remember if it was Brian or Danny, but I think it was Brian. And I looked at my partner, Brian, and I said, you're right. I said, I am being a hypocrite. And I said, I need to go to the doctor. So I left work and I went to the doctor, and guess what? I had strep throat. The doctor gave me antibiotics, and he said, your strep throat's pretty bad. He said, if you would have waited 2 more days, you'd have been in the hospital with pneumonia. Right? So you got to set an example for your people. Take care of your health and your body. Okay, so like I mentioned before, this problem doesn't help our field surveyors. It doesn't help our profession, and it doesn't help our businesses, right? So we need to fix this. How do you fix it? It's not an easy fix. I'm not saying that. There's no silver bullet. This requires long-term thinking, right, and early investment. That's something that human beings and businesses are very bad at, right? We're bad at long-term thinking. We tend to be bad at long-term thinking. We tend to be bad at investing early, right? But that's how we fix this problem. So in conclusion, to review, I told you the story about Dave, right? Dave calls. He's in his late 50s, early 60s. He's broke, struggling to feed his family. He's injured or sick, or it's been snowing for 6 months, and his boss won't teach him CAD. He's upset, right? So I described what is the problem that Dave has. What situation is he in? I talked about how the problem happens. We talked about why the problem happens. Then I gave you some suggestions on how to fix the problem, right? So hopefully this will bring some attention to the issue, and we can start to change this pattern that we have, this really destructive pattern in surveying. All right, the next episode, I am going to talk about how you design an effective profit sharing program. I'm going to do that for my friend Brady. I do not know how to do that because we haven't been able to profit share at RH yet. That's something we really want to do. We want to do quarterly profit sharing. We just haven't been able to consistently make enough of a profit to make that a reality. We've been learning lessons the hard way and putting a bunch of money back into the business. But I think I can share some interesting insights on that topic. I hope I can tell you about how some profit sharing programs have been ineffective at previous places I've worked, and I can tell you a little bit about how we've designed our quarterly profit sharing program here at RH. So we have a program in place. We just haven't been able to use it yet, but I can tell you a little bit about how we designed it and how we hope it works, and then maybe after we've actually done that a few quarters in the next year or two, I hope we can revisit about how that's worked. So that's what's on the next docket, the next episode. I think that will be episode 14. After that, it's episode 15. I haven't scripted either of those yet, but I think episode 15, I'm going to talk about why I don't want to buy your survey business. So, I don't know, maybe once a year or twice a year, I talk to kind of an old crusty surveyor who wants to retire, and he wants me to pay $4 million for his business, and it's just not worth that. So I want to talk about why that business isn't worth anything to me, and how you can avoid being in that situation if you're a business owner. It's another thing that requires long-term planning and investment, right? So even if you're like me, like I'm in my mid-40s. I just turned 44 a couple weeks ago, and we're already thinking about that here at RH. How do we make sure the next generation of leaders is in place and ready to continue our legacy and keep the company alive, and how do we enable that? And I'm 44. I got 20 years left, and we're already starting to think about that because you don't want to wait too long. So anyways, that'll be episode 15. All right. So if you enjoy the podcast, subscribe please on YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes. Share the podcast for us on social media, or tell another surveyor about it. You can support the podcast now on Patreon. It's $10 a month. If you'd like to do that, you don't have to do it. I'm going to keep doing the podcast, but if you would like to, that will help me pay for some of Carly's help. She helps me with the podcast, some of the admin stuff, and help pay for some of the software we use to produce the podcast and the web hosting, things like that. You can also sponsor the podcast if you want. We can talk about your product or service. If it's quality product or service for surveyors, I can feature it on the podcast. We can interview you about it. Or if you're a company that's looking to find good experienced project surveyors or people at a high level that might be listening to these episodes, and you want to talk about your career opportunities, we could do that too. So reach out to me if you'd like to sponsor the podcast. I just want to let folks know I've had, a handful of people reach out to me by email or text message just to say thank you for the podcast, how much they're enjoying it, and how it's helping them. I really appreciate that feedback. Sometimes I feel like I'm just talking into a black hole or a brick wall, but I know there's people out there that are listening, and I really appreciate it. I know you guys are busy and you have lives and families, but you take a couple minutes to just send me a thank you note, and that makes my whole week. So thank you. We don't get enough gratitude in life, and I appreciate that you take the time to share a little bit of your gratitude with me. So thank you for that. So, all right, that'll wrap it up for episode 13. That's going to wrap up our episode for today. Once again, I want to thank you guys for listening. Appreciate that. Don't forget, you can check out the podcast, download episodes, view show notes at www.landonblake.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, or you have a suggestion for a future topic for an episode, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find my contact information all over the web. Landon Blake, I'd love to hear from you, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks.